ISO 22000 is an internationally recognized standard that sets out the requirements for a food safety management system. Food safety management system is a strategic decision for an organization that can help to improve the overall performance in food safety. ISO 22000 documents provides the potential benefits to an organization of implementing a food safety management system. The ability to provide safe foods, products and services that meet customer and applicable statutory and regulatory requirements. Addressing risks associated with its objectives. The ability to demonstrate conformity to specified requirements. Food safety management system employs the process approach, which incorporates the plan do check act cycle and risk-based thinking. ISO 22000 standard specifies the requirement of food safety management system to enable an organization that is directly or indirectly involved in the food chain to plan, implement, operate, maintain and update a food safety management system, providing products and services that are safe, to demonstrate compliance with applicable statutory and regulatory requirements, to evaluate and assess mutually agreed customer food safety requirement, and to demonstrate conformity, to effectively communicate food safety issues to interested parties within the food chain, to ensure that the organization conform to its stated food safety policy, to demonstrate conformity to relevant interested party, to seek certification or registration of food safety management system by external organization, or make self-assessment, or self-declaration of conformity. High-level structure-based ISO 22000 standard requirements. We'll discuss about why and what of food safety management system. What is food safety, FSMS, and how does it support business improvement? What is process approach for food safety management system? Why implement a food safety management system? The background for development and benefits. The scheme requirements and updates. What is food safety? Food safety means that food will not cause harm to the consumer when it is prepared or eaten according to its intended use. As the introduction of food safety hazards can occur at any point in the food chain, adequate control throughout the food chain is essential. Food safety is ensured through the combination of efforts of all parties involved in the food chain. The term hazard is not to be confused with the term risk, which, in the context of food safety, means a function of the probability of an adverse health effect, for example, becoming diseased, and the severity of that effect, for example, death, hospitalization, when exposed to a specified hazard. Food safety hazards include allergens and radiological substances. In animal food, relevant food safety hazards are those are hazardous to the animal species for food is intended. In feed and feed ingredients, relevant food safety hazards can be present in feed and feed ingredients, and that can through animal consumption of feed be transferred to food, and can have the potential to cause an adverse health effect for the animal, or the human consumer. Operations other than those directly handling feed and food, for example, producers of packaging materials, disinfectants, relevant food safety hazards can be directly or indirectly transferred to food, when used as intended. What are the benefits of food safety? List out the 10 major benefits.
The global market and consumers. Year after year, a large number of food products are withdrawn, or recalled from the world market, because food safety-related issues, pathogens, were detected. The literature and the facts shown the reasons for withdrawal are manifold and vary from case to case, and it is impossible to consider all situations can arise in a single document, and in a single control measure. The globalization of food supply chain, and the increasing complexity of the agro-food chain, requires efficient mechanisms of communication and management with the aim of preventing and controlling food incidents. Consequences of withdrawal of products for companies. Damage to the image of companies. Cost increases. Weakens the relation between companies and consumers. What is management system? To know management system, let's first understand system and working systematically. Even though there are no normative references in this ISO 22000 document. System. Set of interrelated or interacting elements. Work systematically. To be effective, things must be organized in a suitable and practical way, and should be done in a certain sequence. Set of interrelated, or interacting elements of an organization to establish policies, and objectives, and processes to achieve those objectives. A structured management system essentially provides a framework around which people can operate in order for the organization to achieve its desired outcomes in an effective and efficient manner. In other words, the management system is simply the way we want things done. The management system can address quality, food safety, health and safety, environmental issues, to give you few examples. Increasingly, organizations are seeking to integrate systems resulting in quality, health, and safety, and environment management systems. For a management system to be effective, the organization must check that it is achieving and maintaining the appropriate levels of performance, review progress to ensure continuing suitability, and effective interface and interrelation between various processes. The focus of each element of the system naturally differs. For example, quality management systems focus on customer needs, while occupational safety and health management systems focus on the prevention of the safety risks to people. A set of interrelated or interacting elements to establish policy, objectives and to achieve those objectives, used to direct and control an organization with regards to food safety. A food safety management system must meet the requirements for the organization within the food chain, to demonstrate its ability to control food safety hazards, in order to ensure that the food is safe at the time of consumption. According to ISO 22000-2018, Clause 1, plan, implement, operate, maintain and update a food safety management system providing products and service that are safe, in accordance with their intended use. Some common perceptions associated with management system are: my business is not susceptible to disruption. Require us to develop procedures on the basis of the abstract standard. It's differentiated from business development. Manual on the self-collection dust. It puts creativity into a straitjacket. It's expensive. Massive amount of requirement. And difficult to implement. Process-based approach. Process. Set of interrelated or interacting activities that use inputs to deliver an intended result. Process approach. The process approach involves the systematic definition and management of processes and their interactions to achieve the intended results in accordance with the food safety policy and strategic direction of the organization. Management of the processes and the system can be achieved using the PDCA cycle, with an overall focus on risk-based thinking, aimed at taking advantage of opportunities and preventing undesirable results. The application of the process-based approach in a food safety management system. Understanding and consistency in meeting the requirements. The consideration of the processes in terms of added value. The achievement of the effective performance of the process. Improvement of processes based on the evaluation of data and information. A controlled process can be described by the figure here, which shows the difference between a controlled process and a process not in control. The PDCA cycle. Plan, establish the objectives of the system and its processes, provide the resources needed to deliver the results, and identify and address risks and opportunities. Do, implement what was planned. Check, monitor and, where relevant, measure processes, and the resulting products and services, analyze and evaluate information and data from monitoring, measuring and verification activities, and report the results. Act, take actions to improve performance, as necessary. Here is the PDCA cycle for food safety management system. Plan, context of organization, leadership, planning, and support. Do, operation. Check, performance evaluation. Act, improvement. Plan, do, check, act cycle. The Deming model is universal and encompasses quality control, as well as quality assurance and continuous improvement. Risk-based thinking. Risk-based thinking is essential for achieving an effective FSMS. In ISO 22000 document, risk-based thinking is addressed on two levels: organizational, which is consistent with the process approach. Organizational risk management. Risk is the effect of uncertainty. Uncertainty can have positive or negative effects. In the context of organizational risk management, a positive deviation arising from a risk can provide an opportunity, but not all positive effects of risk results in opportunities. An organization plans and implements actions to address organizational risks. Addressing risks established a basis for increasing the effectiveness of the FSMS, achieving improved results and preventing negative effects. Hazard analysis, operational processes. The concept of risk-based thinking based on the HACCP principles at the operational level is implicit. The FSMS takes the food safety requirements from various stakeholders and with the application of the PDCA methodology, produces managed business community. The iterative model of the PDCA cycle ensures that, not only is business continuity established, but also continuously managed toward improvement. High-level structure. ISO decided in 2012 that all management system standards shall use a common framework containing unified high-level structure, common text and terminology. Individual management system standard will add additional discipline-specific requirements as required, applicable for all new standards and upcoming revisions of existing standards. Purpose and benefits of the high-level structure. It's provide the core set of requirements. Focus on effective process management to produce outcomes. Through leadership commitment and involvement. Reflect changes in increasingly complex, demanding and dynamic environments, through identification of the context of the organization, its stakeholders and risk analysis, and facilitate sustainable business development. ISO 22000 standard specifies the requirements for a food safety management system that combines the key elements to ensure food safety along the food chain, till final consumption. Prerequisite program, food safety, basic conditions and activities that are necessary to maintain a hygienic environment throughout the food chain, suitable for the production, handlings, and provision of safe end products, and safe food for human environment. HACCP principles. It is a method to assess hazards, and establish control systems that focus on prevention. System management, system to establish policy and objectives, and to achieve those objectives, and thereby improving the efficiency and effectiveness. Interactive communication, essential to ensure that all relevant food hazards are identified, and adequately controlled at each step with the food chain. This implies communication between organizations back and forth in the food chain. Communicating with customers and suppliers about identified hazards and control measures will help clarify the requirements of customers and suppliers, for instance, regarding to the impact on the finished product. Business benefits of food safety management system. Systematic approach. Compliance with the customer, statutory and regulatory requirements. Organized and targeted communication among trade partners. Facilitate better business processes. Increased due diligence. Systematic management of prerequisite program. Better planning and less post-process verification. More efficient and dynamic food safety hazard control. Reduce liability and risk. Widely applicable as focused on end results. Harmonization of existing standards on food safety. A systematic approach to change and improvement. Plan, do, check, act cycle. Focus on food safety requirements and communication across food chain. These are the important benefits of food safety management system.
ISO 22000, Food Safety Management System Standard contain 10 clauses. Clause 1, Scope. Clause 2, Normative References. Clause 3, Terms and Definitions. Clause 4, Context of the organization. Clause 5, Leadership. Clause 6, Planning. Clause 7, Support. Clause 8, Operation. Clause 9, Performance Evaluation. And, Clause 10, Improvement. We'll discuss elaborately. Context of the organization. Understanding the organization and its context. The organization determines external and internal issues that are relevant to its purpose and that affect its ability to achieve the intended results of food safety management system. The organization identify, review and update information related to these external and internal issues. Understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties. To ensure that the organization has the ability to consistently provide the products and services that meet applicable statutory, regulatory and customer requirements with regard to food safety, the organization shall determine the interested parties that are relevant to the food safety management system, and the relevant requirements of the interested parties of the food safety management system. Determining the scope of the food safety management system. The organization determine the boundaries and applicability of the food safety management system to establish its scope. The scope shall specify the products and services, processes and production sites that are included in the food safety management system. The scope shall also include the activities, processes, products or services that can have an influence on the food safety of its end products. Food Safety Management System. The organization establish, implement, maintain, update and continually improve a food safety management system, including the processes needed and their interactions, in accordance with the requirements of ISO 22000 document. Leadership and commitment. Top management demonstrate leadership and commitment with respect to the food safety management system by ensuring that the food safety policy and the objectives of the food safety management system are established and are compatible with the strategic direction of the organization. Ensuring the integration of the food safety management system requirements into the organization's business processes. Ensuring that the resources needed for the food safety management system are available. Communicating the importance and confirming to the food safety management system requirements, applicable statutory and regulatory requirements, and mutually agreed customer requirements related to food safety. Ensuring that the food safety management system is evaluated and maintained to achieve its intended results. Directing and supporting persons to contribute to the effectiveness of the food safety management system. Promoting continual improvement. Supporting other relevant management roles to demonstrate their leadership, as it applies to their areas of responsibility. Establishing the food safety policy. Top management establish, implement and maintain a food safety policy that is appropriate to the purpose and context of the organization. It provides a framework for setting and reviewing the objectives of the food safety management system. Includes a commitment to satisfy applicable food safety requirements, including statutory and regulatory requirements, and mutually agreed customer requirements related to food safety. Addresses internal and external communication. Includes a commitment to continual improvement of the food safety management system. Addresses the need to ensure competencies related to food safety. Communicating the food safety policy. The food safety policy shall be available and maintained as documented information. Be communicated, understood, and applied at all levels within the organization. Be available to relevant interested parties. Organizational roles, responsibilities and authorities. Top management ensure that the responsibilities and authorities for relevant roles are assigned, communicated, and understood within the organization. Top management assign the responsibility and authority for ensuring that the food safety management system conforms to the requirements of ISO 22000 document. Reporting on the performance of the food safety management system to top management. Appointing the food safety team and the food safety team leader. Designating persons with defined responsibility and authority to initiate and document actions. The food safety team leader is responsible for ensuring the food safety management system is established, implemented, maintained and updated, managing and organizing the work of the food safety team, ensuring relevant training and competencies for the food safety team, reporting to top management on the effectiveness and suitability of the food safety management system. All persons shall have the responsibility to report problems with regards to the food safety management system to identified persons. Planning. Actions to address risks and opportunities. When planning for the food safety management system, the organization shall consider the issues referred to determine the risks and opportunities that need to be addressed. Give assurance that the food safety management system can achieve its intended results. Enhance desirable effects. Prevent, or reduce, undesirable effects. Achieve continual improvement. Objectives of the food safety management system and planning to achieve. The organization establish objectives for the food safety management system at relevant functions and levels. The objectives of the food safety management system be consistent with the food safety policy. Be measurable. Take into account applicable food safety requirements, including statutory, regulatory and customer requirements. Be monitored and verified. Be communicated. be maintained and updated as appropriate. The organization shall retain documented information on the objectives for the food safety management system. Planning of changes. When the organization determines the need for changes to the food safety management system, including personnel changes, the changes shall be carried out and communicated in a planned manner. The organization consider the purpose of the changes and their potential consequences, the continued integrity of the food safety management system, the availability of resources to effectively implement the changes, the allocation or reallocation of responsibilities and authorities.
Clause 7, Support. Resources. People. The organization ensure that persons necessary to operate and maintain an effective food safety management system are competent. Where the assistance of external experts is used for the development, implementation, operation or assessment of the food safety management system, evidence of agreement or contracts defining the competency, responsibility, and authority of external experts shall be retained as documented information. Infrastructure. The organization provide the resources for the determination, establishment and maintenance of the infrastructure necessary to achieve conformity with the requirements of the food safety management system. Infrastructure can include land, vessels, buildings and associated utilities, equipment, including hardware and software, transportation, information and communication technology. Work environment. The organization determine, provide and maintain the resources for the establishment, management, and maintenance of the work environment necessary to achieve conformity with the requirements of the food safety management system. Externally developed elements of the food safety management system. When an organization establishes, maintains, updates and continually improves food safety management system by using externally developed elements of a food safety management system, including PRPs, the hazard analysis, and the hazard control plan, the organization shall ensure that the provided elements are developed in conformance with requirements of ISO 22000 document, applicable to the sites, processes and products of the organization, specifically adapted to the processes and products of the organization by the food safety team, implemented, maintained and updated as required by ISO 22000 document, retained as documented information. Control of externally provided processes, products or services. The organization establish and apply criteria for the evaluation, selection, monitoring of performance, and re-evaluation of external providers of processes, products and/or services. Ensure adequate communication of requirements to the external providers. Ensure that externally provided processes, products or services that do not adversely affect the organization's ability to consistently meet the requirements of the food safety management system. Retain documented information of these activities, and any necessary actions as a result of the evaluation and re-evaluations. Competence. The organization determine the necessary competence of persons, including external providers, doing work under its control, that affects its food safety performance, and effectiveness of the food safety management system. Ensure that these persons, including the food safety team, and those responsible for the operation of the hazard control plan, are competent on the basis of appropriate education, training and/or experience. The organization ensure that the food safety team has a combination of multidisciplinary knowledge and experience in developing and implementing the food safety management system, including, but not limited to, the organization's products, processes, equipment, and food safety hazards within the scope of the food safety management system. Where applicable, take actions to acquire the necessary competence, and evaluate the effectiveness of the actions taken. Retain appropriate documented information as evidence of competence. Awareness. The organization ensure that all relevant persons, doing work under the organization's control shall be aware of the food safety policy. The objectives of the food safety management system relevant to their tasks. Their individual contribution to the effectiveness of the food safety management system, including the benefits of improved food safety performance. The implications of not conforming with the food safety management system requirements.
Communication. Basics and importance. In this video, we will learn what communication is. We will also learn the importance of communication and ways to improve our communication skills to have better personal and professional relationships. Talking is an integral part of living. We talk to our family members, friends, people at work, and even strangers. But do we really communicate with them? Let's see how communication is different from talking. Talking simply refers to speaking words and sentences. Sometimes the message is understood, sometimes it is not. Communicating is one step further in the process. It is the sharing of information between two or more people to reach a common understanding. Communication is a two-way process. It needs a sender or a speaker and a receiver or a listener. The speaker's role is to speak clearly, while the listener's role is to pay attention to the speaker. However, quite often people focus more on what they want to say rather than listen to others. Now, before we understand the importance of communication, let's imagine a day without speaking to For example, when you can't find your clothes, you reach out to your mother or father. We also need to talk to others to share our joys and sorrows with them. At work, we talk to our co-workers to share ideas, exchange information, and seek help from them. Without communication, our life would come to a standstill. We communicate not just verbally, but also non-verbally through our body language and facial expressions. Another mode of communication is written, which includes letters, emails, notes, etc. To make sure we talk and write effectively and that our audience gets the message, we must follow the 7 C's of communication. Let's see what these are. Be clear. When writing or speaking to someone, be clear about your message. Think what your purpose is in communicating with another person. If you're not sure, then your audience won't be either. Be concise. Keep your message short and to the point. Make sure your message is concrete and gives your audience a clear picture of what you want to say. Be correct. Correct communication is error-free and uses language that is understood by others. Be coherent. Coherent communication is logical. It means that all points are connected to the main topic and follow the correct order or sequence. Your message should be complete. After reading or listening to your message, others should know what is to be done. Finally, be courteous. Use respectful and polite language at all times. Now, let's look at a conversation to see how an unclear message can confuse others.
Hello, doctor. My right leg has been paining since yesterday.
All right, let me check.
Well, you have got sciatica. I'll write down some analgesics for your inflammation and proceed from there based on your body's response. What? I don't understand. Is it serious? Will I be fine? Am I going to die?
You'll be fine. Just take these medicines.
All right. I don't know what he's saying. I think I should speak to some other doctor. I don't trust this doctor.
Do you think this communication was effective? What made it fail? There are many barriers to communication, and these may occur at any stage in the communication process. They lead to misunderstanding and wasted time. The use of overcomplicated or unfamiliar language is a common barrier to communication. Here, the doctor used difficult medical terms that the patient did not understand. This left him confused, nervous, and unsure. Our emotions also affect our communication. How we interpret what we hear is affected by the thoughts that come to our mind when we are listening. For example, if your boss asks if the task that was assigned to you has been completed, and you interpret it as the boss blaming you for not completing the task, you are likely to respond in anger. However, if you interpret the message as your boss just wanting to know the status, you are likely to feel less angry and defensive. Distraction and lack of interest also affects understanding. We filter information based on what we want to hear. For example, when our manager is assigning work, we only listen to those which we need to do. Remember, developing effective communication skills means improving both your speaking and listening skills. Even if you are not born with these skills, you can develop them by paying attention to what and how you say things and listening attentively to others.
Communication. External communication. The organization ensures that sufficient information is communicated externally and is available for interested parties of the food chain. The organization establish, implement and maintain effective communications with external providers and contractors, customers and/or consumers in relation. Statutory and regulatory authorities. Another organization. Internal communication. The organization establish, implement, and maintain an effective system for communicating issues having an impact on food safety. To maintain the effectiveness of the food safety management system, the organization ensure that the food safety team is informed in a timely manner of changes in the following: products or new products, raw materials, ingredients and services, production systems and equipment, production premises, location of equipment and surrounding environment, cleaning and sanitation programs. Also the internal communication of packing, storage and distribution systems, competencies and/or allocation of responsibilities and authorizations, applicable statutory and regulatory requirements, knowledge regarding food safety hazards and control measures, customer, sector and other requirements that the organization observes, relevant inquiries and communications from external interested parties, complaints and alerts indicating food safety hazards associated with the end product, other conditions that have an impact on food safety. Documented information. The organization's food safety management system include documented information required by ISO 22000 document. Documented information determined the organization as being necessary for the effectiveness of the food safety management system. Documented information and food safety requirements required by statutory, regulatory authorities and customers. When creating and updating documented information, the organization ensure appropriate identification and description, for example, title, date, author, or reference number, format, for example, language, software version, graphics, and media, for example, paper, electronic. Review and approval for suitability and adequacy. Control of documented information. Documented information required by the food safety management system, and by the document be controlled to ensure it is available and suitable for use, where and when it is needed, it is adequately protected, for example, from loss of confidentiality, improper use, or loss of integrity. For the control of documented information, the organization address the following activities, as applicable: distribution, access, retrieval and use of documents, storage and preservation, including preservation of legibility, control of changes, for example, version control, retention and disposition. Documented information of external origin determined by the organization to be necessary for the planning and operation of the FSMS shall be identified as appropriate and controlled. Documented information retained as evidence of conformity shall be protected from unintended alterations.
Operations. Operational planning and control. The organization plan, implement, control, maintain, and update the processes needed to meet requirements for the realization of safe products, and to implement the actions determined by establishing criteria for the processes, implementing control of the processes in accordance with the criteria, keeping documented information to the extent necessary, to have the confidence to demonstrate that the processes have been carried out as planned. The organization control plan changes, and review the consequences of unintended changes, taking action to mitigate any adverse effects. The organization ensure that outsourced processes are controlled. The organization establish, implement, maintain and update PRPs to facilitate the prevention and/or reduction of contaminants, including food safety hazards, in the products, product processing and work environment. The PRPs be appropriately to the organization and its context with regard to food safety. Appropriate to the size and type of the operation, and the nature of the products being manufactured and/or handled. Implemented across the entire production system, either as programs applicable in general, or as programs applicable to a particular product or process. The PRPs approved by the food safety team. When selecting and/or establishing PRPs, the organization ensure that applicable statutory, regulatory and mutually agreed customer requirements are identified. The organization should consider the applicable part of the ISO TS 22002 series, applicable standards, codes of practice and guidelines. When establishing PRPs, the organization consider construction, layout of buildings, and associated utilities, layout of premises, including zoning, workspace, and employee facilities, supplies of air, water, energy, and other utilities, pest control, waste and sewage disposal, and supporting services, the suitability of equipment, and its accessibility for cleaning and maintenance, supplier approval, and assurance processes, for example, raw materials, ingredients, chemicals and packaging. When establishing PRPs, the organization also consider reception of incoming materials, storage, dispatch, transportation, and handling of products, measures for the prevention of cross-contamination, cleaning and disinfecting, personal hygiene, product information and consumer awareness. Documented information specifies the selection, establishment, applicable monitoring, and verification of the PRPs. The traceability system be able to uniquely identify incoming material from the suppliers, and the first stage of the distribution route of the end product. When establishing and implementing the traceability system, organization shall be considered as a minimum relation of lots of received materials, ingredients, and intermediate products to the end products. Reworking of materials or products. Distribution of the end product. The organization ensure that applicable statutory, regulatory, and customer requirements are identified. Documented information as evidence of the traceability system be retained for a defined period, as a minimum, the shelf life of the product. The organization verify and test the effectiveness of the traceability system. Emergency preparedness and response. Top management ensure procedures are in place to respond to potential emergency situations or incidents that can have an impact on food safety, which are relevant to the role of the organization in the food chain. Documented information be established and maintained to manage these situations and incidents. Handling of emergencies and incidents. The organization respond to actual emergency situations and incidents by ensuring applicable statutory and regulatory requirements are identified, communicating internally, and communicating externally, for example, suppliers, customers, appropriate authorities, and media. Take action to reduce the consequences of the emergency situation, appropriate to the magnitude of the emergency or incident, and the potential food safety impact. Periodically test procedures where practical. Review and update the documented information after the occurrence of any incident, emergency situation or tests. Hazard control. Characteristics of raw materials, ingredients, and product contact materials. The organization ensure that all applicable statutory and regulatory food safety requirements are identified for all raw materials, ingredients, and product contact materials. The organization maintain documented information concerning all raw materials, ingredients, and product contact materials to the extent needed to conduct the hazard analysis, including biological, chemical and physical characteristics, composition of formulated ingredients, including additives and processing aids, Source, for example, animal, mineral or vegetable, place of origin, provenance, method of production, method of packaging and delivery, storage conditions and shelf life, preparation and/or handling before use or processing, acceptance criteria related to food safety or specification of purchase materials, and ingredients appropriate to their intended use. Characteristic of end products. The organization ensure that all applicable statutory and regulatory food safety requirements are identified for all the end products intended to be produced. The organization maintain documented information concerning the characteristics of end products, to the extent needed to conduct the hazard analysis, including information on product name or similar identification, composition, biological, chemical and physical characteristics relevant for food safety, intended shelf life, and storage conditions, packaging, labeling relating to food safety and/or instructions for handling, preparations and intended use, method of distribution and delivery. The intended use, including reasonably expected handling of the end product, and any unintended use but reasonably expected mishandling and misuse of the end product, be considered, and be maintained as documented information to the extent needed to conduct the hazard analysis. Where appropriate, groups of consumers or users be identified for each product. Groups of consumers or users known to be especially vulnerable to specific food safety hazards shall be identified. Flow diagrams and description of processes. Preparation of the flow diagrams. The food safety team establish, maintain, and update flow diagrams as documented information for the products or product categories, and the processes covered by the FSMS. Flow diagram provide a graphic representation of the process. Flow diagrams shall be used, when conducting the hazard analysis as a basis for evaluating the possible occurrence, increase, decrease, or introduction of food safety hazards. Flow diagrams be clear, accurate and sufficiently detailed to the extent needed to conduct the hazard analysis. Flow diagrams shall include the sequence and interaction of the steps in the operation. Any outsourced processes. Where raw materials, ingredients, processing aids, packaging materials, utilities and intermediate products enter the flow. Where reworking and recycling take place. Where end products, intermediate products, byproducts and waste are released or removed. On-site confirmation of flow diagrams. The food safety team confirm on-site the accuracy of the flow diagrams, update the flow diagrams where appropriate, and retain as documented information. Description of processes and process environment. The food safety team describe, to the extent needed to conduct the hazard analysis, the layout of premises, including food and non-food handling areas, processing equipment and contact materials, processing aids and flow of materials, existing PRPs, process parameters, control measures, or procedures that can influence food safety, external requirements, for example, form statutory authorities or customers, that can impact the choice and the strictness of the control measures. The variations resulting from expected seasonal changes or shift patterns shall be included as appropriate. The description be updated as appropriate and maintained as documented information.
Hazard analysis. Hazard identification and determination of acceptable levels. The organization identify and document all food safety hazards that are reasonably expected to occur in relation to the type of product, type of process, and process environment. The identification based on the preliminary information and data collected in accordance with preliminary steps to enable hazard analysis. Experience. Internal and external information including, to the extent possible, epidemiological, scientific and other historical data. Information from the food chain on food safety hazards related to the safety of the end products, intermediate products, and the food at the time of consumption. Statutory, regulatory and customer requirements. Hazards should be considered in sufficient detail to enable hazard assessment, and the selection of appropriate control measures. The organization identifies steps, for example, receiving raw materials, processing, distribution and delivery, at which each food safety hazard can be present, be introduced, increase or persist. When identifying hazards, the organization consider the stages preceding and following in the food chain, all steps in the flow diagram, the process equipment, utilities or services, process environment and persons. The organization determine the acceptable level in the end product of each food safety hazard identified, whenever possible. When determining acceptable levels, the organization shall ensure that applicable statutory, regulatory and customer requirements are identified. Consider the intended use of end products. Consider any other relevant information. The organization maintain documented information concerning the determination of acceptable levels, and the justification for the acceptable levels. Hazard assessment. The organization conduct, for each identifies food safety hazard, a hazard assessment to determine whether its prevention or reduction to an acceptable level is essential. The organization evaluate each food safety hazard with regard to the likelihood of its occurrence in the end product, prior to application of control measures, the severity of its adverse health effects in relation to the intended use. The organization identify any significant food safety hazards, the methodology used to describe, and the result of the hazard assessment shall be maintained as documented information. Selection and categorization of control measures. Based on the hazard assessment, the organization select an appropriate control measure, or combination of control measures, that will be capable of preventing, or reducing the identified significant food safety hazards to defined acceptable levels. The organization categorize the selected identified control measures, to be managed as OPRPs or its CCPs. The categorization be carried out using a systematic approach. For each of the control measures selected, there be an assessment of the likelihood of failure of its functioning, the severity of the consequence in the case of failure of its functioning. This assessment includes the effect on identified significant food safety hazards, the location in relation to other control measures, whether it is specifically established and applied to reduce the hazards to an acceptable level, whether it is a single measure, or is part of combination of control measures. In addition, for each control measure, the systematic approach includes an assessment of the feasibility of establishing measurable critical limits, and/or measurable, or observable action criteria, monitoring to detect any failure to remain within critical limit, and/or measurable, or observable action criteria, applying timely corrections in case of failure. The decision-making process, and results of the selection, and categorization of the control measures shall be maintained as documented information. External requirements, for example, statutory, regulatory and customer requirements, that can impact the choice and the strictness of the control measures, shall also be maintained as documented information. Validation of control measures and combinations of control measures. The food safety team validate that the selected control measures are capable of achieving the intended control of the significant food safety hazards. This validation be done prior to implementation of control measures, and combinations of control measures, to be included in the hazard control plan, and after any change therein. When the result of validation shows that the control measures are not capable of achieving the intended control, the food safety team modify and reassess the control measures and/or combinations of control measures. The food safety team maintain the validation methodology and evidence of capability of the control measures to achieve the intended control as documentation. Modification can include changes in control measures, for example, process parameter, rigor and/or their combination, and/or changes in the manufacturing technologies for raw materials, end product characteristics, methods of distribution, and intended use of the end products. Hazard Control Plan, HACCP or OPRP Plan. The organization establish, implement and maintain a hazard control plan. The hazard control plan shall be maintained as documented information, and shall include the information for each control measure at each CCP or OPRP. Food safety hazards to be controlled at the CCP, or by the OPRP. Critical limits at CCP, or action criteria for OPRP. Monitoring procedures. Corrections to be made, if critical limits or action criteria are not met. Responsibilities and authorities. Records of monitoring. Determination of critical limits and action criteria. Critical limits at CCPs and action criteria for OPRPs be specified. The rationale for their determination shall be maintained as documented information. Critical limits at CCPs be measurable. Conformance with critical limits shall ensure that the acceptable level is not exceeded. Action criteria for OPRPs be measurable or observable. Conformance with action criteria shall contribute to the assurance that the acceptable level is not exceeded. Monitoring systems at CCPs and for OPRPs. At each CCP, a monitoring system be established for each control measure, or combination of control measures, to detect any failure to remain within the critical limits. The system shall include all scheduled measurements relative to the critical limits. For each OPRP, a monitoring system be established for the control measure, or combination of control measures, to detect failure to meet the action criterion. The monitoring system, at each CCP and for each OPRP, consists of documented information, including measurements or observations that provide results within an adequate time frame. Monitoring methods or devices used. Applicable calibration methods or, for OPRPs, equivalent methods for verification of reliable measurements or observations. Monitoring frequency. Monitoring results. Responsibility and authority related to monitoring. Responsibility and authority related to evaluation of monitoring results. At each CCP, the monitoring method and frequency be capable of timely detection of any failure to remain within critical limits, to allow timely isolation and evaluation of the product. For each OPRP, the monitoring method and frequency be proportionate to the likelihood of failure and the severity of consequences. When monitoring an OPRP is based on subjective data from observations, for example, visual inspection, the method shall be supported by instructions or specifications. Actions when critical limits or action criteria are not met. The organization specify corrections and corrective actions to be taken when critical limits or action criteria are not met, and shall ensure that the potentially unsafe products are not released. The cause of nonconformity is identified. The parameters controlled at the CCP, or by the OPRP are returned within the critical limits or action criteria. Recurrence is prevented. The organization make corrections in accordance with corrections and corrective actions. Implementation of the Hazard Control Plan. The organization implement and maintain the Hazard Control Plan, and retain evidence of the implementation as documented information. PRP and OPRP. PRPs are the basic activities and conditions required for maintaining a hygienic environment throughout the food chain, which is ideal for the production, handling, supply of safe finished products, and safe food for human consumption. The type of PRPs depends on the certain product and process. PRP focuses on the general process instead on any specific step in the process. OPRPs were identified by risk assessments. OPRPs are essential in order to minimize the possibility, or probability of addition of food safety hazards, or the cross-contamination in the finished product, or the processing area. An OPRP is a prerequisite program responsible for controlling a significant hazard. Some common examples of PRPs. Layout and construction of buildings and other utilities. Layout of workspace and employee facilities. Supplies of water, energy, air and remaining utilities. Supporting services like sewage and waste disposal. Equipment acceptance and approach for maintenance and cleaning. Managing raw materials, supplies, disposals and product handling. Sanitation and cleaning. Pest controls. Preventive measures for cross-contamination. Personnel hygiene, etc. Examples are OPRPs. Metal and glass detection. Temperature control. Sanitation procedure. Personnel hygiene and sanitation. Difference between prerequisite program, PRP, operational prerequisite program, OPRP, and critical control point, CCP. Operations. Updating the information specifying the PRPs and the Hazard Control Plan. The establishment of the Hazard Control Plan, the organization update the information, if necessary, characteristics of raw materials, ingredients and product contact materials, characteristics of end products, intended use, flow diagrams, and descriptions of processes and process environment. The organization ensure that the Hazard Control Plan and/or the PRPs are up to date. Control of monitoring and measuring. The organization provide evidence that the specified monitoring and measuring methods, and equipment in use are adequate for the monitoring and measuring activities related to the PRPs, and the hazard control plan. The monitoring and measuring equipment used be calibrated or verified at specified intervals prior to use. Adjusted or readjusted as necessary. Identified to enable the calibration status to be determined. Safeguarded from adjustments that would invalidate the measurement results. Protected from damage and deterioration. The results of calibration and verification be retained as documented information. The calibration of all the equipment shall be traceable to international or national measurement standards. Where no standards exist, the basis under for calibration or verification shall be retained as documented information. The organization assess the validity of the previous measurement results when the equipment or process environment is found not to conform to requirements. The organization take appropriate action in relation to the equipment or process environment and any product affected by the non-conformance. The assessment and resulting action be maintained as documented information. Software used in monitoring and measuring within the FSMS be validated by the organization, software supplier or third party prior to use. Documented information on validation activities shall be maintained by the organization, and the software shall be updated in a timely manner. Whenever there are changes, including software configuration or modifications to commercial off-the-shelf software, they shall be authorized, documented and validated before implementation. Commercial off-the-shelf software in general use within its designed application range can be considered to be sufficiently validated. Verification related to PRPs and the hazard control plan. The organization establish, implement and maintain verification activities. The verification planning shall define purpose, methods, frequencies and responsibilities for the verification activities. The verification activities confirm that the PRPs are implemented and effective. The hazard control plan is implemented and effective. Hazard levels are within identified acceptable levels. Input to the hazard analysis is updated. Other actions determined by the organization are implemented and effective. The organization ensure that verification activities are not carried out by the person responsible for monitoring the same activities. Verification results be retained as documented information, and be communicated. Where verification is based on testing of end product samples, or direct process samples, and where such test samples show nonconformity with the acceptable level of the food safety hazard, the organization shall handle the affected lots of products as potentially unsafe, and apply corrective actions in accordance with corrective actions. Analysis of results of verification activities. The food safety team conduct an analysis of the results of verification, that shall be used as an input to the performance evaluation of the FSMS.
Control of product and process nonconformities. Corrections. The organization ensure that, when critical limits at CCPs and/or action criteria for OPRPs are not met, the products affected are identified and controlled with regards to their use and release. The organization establish, maintain and update documented information that includes a method of identification, assessment and correction for affected products to ensure their proper handling. Arrangements for review of the corrections carried out. When critical limits at CCPs are not met, affected products be identified and handled as potentially unsafe products. Where action criteria for an OPRP are not met, the following be carried out. Determination of the consequences of that failure with respect to food safety. Determination of the causes of failure. Identification of the affected products, and handling in accordance with disposition of non-conforming products. The organization shall retain results of the evaluation as documented information. Documented information be retained to describe corrections made on non-conforming products and processes, including the nature of the non-conformity, the causes of the failure, the consequences as a result of the non-conformity. Corrective actions. The need for corrective actions be evaluated when critical limits at CCPs and/or action criteria for OPRPs are not met. The organization establish and maintain documented information that specifies appropriate actions to identify and eliminate the cause of detected nonconformities, to prevent recurrence, and to return the process to control after a nonconformity is identified. These actions include reviewing nonconformities identified by consumer, and/or consumer complaints, and/or regulatory inspection reports. Reviewing trends in monitoring results that can indicate loss of control. Determining the causes of nonconformities. Determining and implementing actions to ensure that nonconformities do not recur. Documenting the results of corrective actions taken. Verifying corrective actions taken to ensure that they are effective. The organization retained documented information on all corrective actions. Handling of potentially unsafe products. The organization take actions to prevent potentially unsafe products from entering the food chain, unless it can demonstrate that the food safety hazards of concern are reduced to the defined acceptable levels. The food safety hazards of concern will be reduced to identified acceptable levels prior to entering the food chain, or the product still meets the defined acceptable levels of the food safety hazards of concern despite the nonconformity. The organization retain products that have been identified as potentially unsafe under its control until the products have been evaluated, and the disposition has been determined. If products that have left the control of the organization are subsequently determined to be unsafe, the organization shall notify relevant interested parties and initiate a withdrawal or recall. The controls and related responses from relevant interested parties, and authorization for dealing with potentially unsafe products be retained as documented information. Evaluation for release. Each lot of products affected by the nonconformity be evaluated. Products affected by failure to remain within critical limits at CCPs not be released, but be handled in accordance with disposition of nonconforming products. Products affected by failure to meet action criterion for OPRPs only be released to safe when any of the following conditions apply. Evidence other than the monitoring system demonstrated that the control measures have been effective. Evidence shows that the combined effect of the control measures for that particular product conforms to the performance intended, for example, identified acceptable levels. The results of sampling, analysis and/or other verification activities demonstrate that the affected products conform to the identified acceptable levels for the food safety hazards concerned. Results of evaluation for release of products be retained as documented information. Disposition of nonconforming products. Products that are not acceptable for release be reprocessed or further processed within or outside the organization, to ensure that the food safety hazard is reduced to acceptable levels, or redirected for other use as long as food safety in the food chain is not affected, or destroyed and/or disposed as waste. Documented information on the disposition of nonconforming products, including the identification of the persons with approving authority, be retained. Disposition of nonconforming products. Products that are not acceptable for release be reprocessed or further processed within or outside the organization, to ensure that the food safety hazard is reduced to acceptable levels, or redirected for other use as long as food safety in the food chain is not affected, or destroyed and/or disposed as waste. Documented information on the disposition of nonconforming products, including the identification of the persons with approving authority, be retained. Withdrawn or recalled products, and end products still in stock shall be secured, or held under the control of the organization until they are managed in accordance with disposition of nonconforming products. The cause, extent and result of a withdrawal or recall shall be retained as documented information, and reported to the top management as input for the management review. The organization verify the implementation and effectiveness of withdrawals or recalls through the use of appropriate techniques, for example, mock withdrawal or recall, or practice withdrawal or recall, and retain documented information. Performance evaluation. Monitoring, measurement, analysis and evaluation. The organization determine what needs to be monitored and measured, the methods for monitoring, measurement, analysis and evaluation, as applicable, to ensure valid results, when the monitoring and measuring be performed, when the results for monitoring and measurement be analyzed and evaluated, who should analyze and evaluate the results for monitoring and measurement. The organization retain appropriate documented information as evidence of the results. The organization evaluate the performance and the effectiveness of the FSMS. Analysis and evaluation. The organization analyze and evaluate appropriate data and information arising from monitoring and measurement, including the results of verification activities related to PRPs, and the hazard control plan, and the internal audits, and external audits. The analysis be carried out to confirm that the overall performance of the system meets the planned arrangements, and the FSMS requirements established by the organization. To identify the need for updating or improving the FSMS. To identify trends, which indicate a higher incidence of potentially unsafe products or process failures. The analysis be carried out to establish information for planning of the internal audit program related to the status and importance of areas to be audited. To provide evidence that corrections and corrective actions are effective. The results of the analysis and the resulting activities shall be retained as documented information. The results be reported to top management, and used as input to the management review, and the updating of the FSMS. The organization to conduct internal audits at planned intervals, to provide information on whether the FSMS conforms to the organization's own requirements for its FSMS, the requirements of ISO 22000 document, is effectively implemented and maintained. The organization to plan, establish, implement and maintain an audit programs, including the frequency, methods, responsibilities, planning requirements and reporting, which shall take into consideration the importance of the processes concerned, changes in the FSMS, and the results of monitoring, measurement and previous audits. Define the audit criteria and scope for each audit. Select competent auditors, and conduct audits to ensure objectivity and the impartiality of the audit process. Ensure that the results of the audits are reported to the food safety team and relevant management. The organization to retain documented information as evidence of implementation of the audit program and the audit results. Make the necessary correction, and take the necessary corrective action within the agreed time frame. Determine if the FSMS meets the intent of the food safety policy and objective of the FSMS. Follow-up activities by the organization shall include the verification of the actions taken, and the reporting of the verification results. Management review inputs. The management review to consider the status of actions from previous management reviews, changes in external and internal issues that are relevant to the FSMS, including changes in the organization and its context, information on the performance and the effectiveness of the FSMS, including trends in results of system updating activities, monitoring and measurement results, analysis of the results of verification activities related to PRPs, and the hazard control plan. Management review inputs. Nonconformities and corrective actions, audit results, internal and external, inspections, for example, regulatory, customer, the performance of external providers, the review of risks and opportunities, and of the effectiveness of actions taken to address them, the extent to which objectives of the FSMS have been met. Management review inputs. The adequacy of resources, any emergency situation, incident or withdrawal or recall that occurred, relevant information obtained through external and internal communication, including requests and complaints from interested parties, opportunities for continual improvement. The data presented in a manner that enables top management to relate the information to stated objectives of the FSMS. The outputs of the management review include decisions and actions related to continual improvement opportunities, any need for updated and changes to the FSMS, including resource needs, and review of the food safety policy and objectives of the FSMS. The organization retained documented information as evidence of the results of management reviews. Improvement, nonconformity and corrective action. When a nonconformity occurs, the organization react to the nonconformity and, as applicable, take action to control and correct it, deal with the consequences, evaluate the need for action to eliminate the causes of the nonconformity, in order that it does not recur or occur elsewhere, by reviewing the nonconformity, determining the causes of the nonconformity, determining if similar nonconformities exist, or could potentially occur, implement any action needed, review the effectiveness of any corrective action taken, if necessary, make changes to the FSMS. Corrective actions be appropriate to the effects of the nonconformities encountered. The organization retained documented information as evidence of the nature of the nonconformities and any subsequent actions taken, the results of any corrective action. Continual improvement. The organization continually improves the suitability, adequacy and effectiveness of the FSMS. Top management ensure that the organization continually improves the effectiveness of the FSMS through the use of communication, management review, internal audit, analysis of results of verification activities, validation of control measures and combinations of control measures, corrective actions and FSMS updating. Update of the Food Safety Management System. Top management ensure that the FSMS is continually updated. To achieve this, the food safety team shall evaluate the FSMS at planned intervals. The team shall consider whether it is necessary to review the hazard analysis, the established hazard control plan, and the established PRPs. The updating activities shall be based on input from communication, external as well as internal. Input from other information concerning the suitability, adequacy and effectiveness of the FSMS. Output from the analysis of results of verification activities. Output from management review. System updating activities be retained as documented information, and reported as input to the management review. Thank you for joining the valuable course. Any questions kindly contact through mail, admin@duergene.com. All the best for your examination. Thank you.